girls, I hope you're doing well. It's Kid Bowman here. I'm so glad you can join me for this brand new video of festive season of the year. And I'm so glad you're all being safe for this winter seasons of the year. So I hope you enjoyed my video so far this year. I hope you appreciate you guys, and thank you ever so much for your magnificent support from you guys. I always appreciate you whatsoever. Also, I hope it's been doing so well for you guys, and I guess you will be impressed with my videos. I guess you'll be happy with me. Okay, so I just want to show you this book I'm going to read on this Christmas classic story. This is called Christmas Carol. Do you like Christmas Carol, guys? Yes, of course I like Christmas Carol. Especially like film adaptations, if you're familiar with them. Are you familiar with Charles Dickens? Back in Victorian times? You can see the whole cover. This is a 1994 edition from Puffin Classics. That's a publication. This is a book publication company called Puffin. Used to publish some old classic books. I hope you, before we begin, where we begin, shall we read to you guys, and I hope you guys will enjoy it. And it's got 5 contents. It's got Jake Marley's Ghost, first of the 3 spirits, second of the 3 spirits, last of the 3 spirits, and that is the end. Now, I have endeavoured in this ghostly little book to raise the ghost of an ideal. We shall not put my readers out of the humour with themselves, with each other, with the season, or with me. Let it haunt their house presently, and no one wish to lay it. Their faithful friend and servant, C.D. Charles Dickens, December 1843. So, the chapter is Marley's Ghost. Marley was dead. To begin with, there is no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good upon change. For anything he chose to put his hand to it, old Marley was as dead as a doornail. Mind, I don't mean to say that I know. Of my own knowledge, what there is particularly dead about the doornail, I might have been inclined myself to regard a coffin nail as the deadliest piece of ironmongery in the trade. But of the wisdom of our ancestors is in the simile, and my unhallowed hands should not disturb it, or, unconscious done for, where you will therefore permit to me to repeat, and pathetically, that Marley was dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew he was dead. Of course he did. How could he be otherwise? Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his executor, his sole administrator, his sole assign, his sole registry legatee, his sole friend and sole mourner. Even Scrooge was not so dreadfully cut up by the sad event, but that he was an excellent man of the business on the very day of the funeral, and so some men said with undealt bargain. A mention of my funeral brings me back to the point. I started from, there is no doubt that Marley was dead. There must be distinctly understand, or nothing wonderful can come of the story I am going to relate. If they were not perfectly convinced that Hamlet's father died before the play began, there won't be nothing more remarkable in his taking a scroll at night in his hysterically ring upon his own ramparts than there would be in any middle-aged gentleman rashly turning after dark in a breezy spot, say St. Paul's churchyard, for instance, literally to astonish his son's weak mind. Scrooge never painted the old Molly's name. They stood years afterwards above the warehouse door, Scrooge and Marley. For one was known as Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people knew to the business and called Scrooge, and sometimes Marley, but he answered to both names. It was all the same to him. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand and a grindstone Scrooge, squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scrapping, clutching, covetous old sinner, and hard as sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out the generous fire, secret and self-contained, and solitary as an oyster. The cold within him froze his old features, nippled his pointed nose, and shriveled his cheek, and stiffened his gait, made his eyes red. His thin lips blew, and spoke out frigidly in his grating voice. A frozen rim was on his head, and his eyebrows, and his weary chin carried his own low temperature always about with him. He iced his coffee in the dog days, and did not follow it 1 degree at Christmas. External heat and cold had little influence on Scrooge. Nor could warmth nor wintry weather chilled him, and no wind that blew was bitterer than he. No falling snow was no more intent upon his purpose, no pitting rain less open to treachery. Foul weather did not know where to have him. The heaviest rain, snow and hail and sleet could boast of the advantage over him in only one respect. Very often came down handsomely, and Scrooge never did. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say, with a gladsome looks, "My dear Scrooge, how are you? Will you come to see me?" No beggars implored him to be just by the trifle. No joy to ask him. It was 6 o'clock. No man or woman ever once, all his life, inquired away to such and such a place of Scrooge. Even the blind men's dog appeared to know him, and when they saw him coming on, which took their owners into the doorways, and caught up courts, and then would wag their tails as through they said, "No eye at all is better than an evil eye duck, master. But what did Scrooge care? It was the very thing he liked, to edge his way along the crowded paths of life, wanting all human sympathy to keep its distance. Was what knowing once called nuts to Scrooge. Once upon a time, all good days in a year, on Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. It was cold and bleak, biting weather, foggy, woeful, and he could hear the people in the court outside go wheezing up and down, beat their hands upon their breasts, and stamping their feet upon the pavement stones to warm them. The city clocks had only just gone 3, but it was quite dark already. It had not been light all day, and candles were flaring in the windows of the labouring offices. Like ruddy smears upon the palpable brown air, a fog came pouring in at every chink and keyhole, and was so dense without that although the court was of the narrowest, the house opposite were mere phantoms to see a dinghy could come drooping, obscuring everything. No one might have thought that nature lived hard by, and brewing was brewing on a large scale. The door of Scrooge's counting house was open, that he might keep his eye upon his clerk, who in the dismal little cell beyond, a sort of tank, was copying letters. Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's was so much smaller that it looked like one coal, but he couldn't replenish it. For Scrooge kept a coal box in his own room, and so surely as the clerk came in with a shovel, Master predicted that it would be necessary for them to part. Wherefore the clerk put on his white comforter and tried to warm himself. And at the candle, in which effort, not being a man of a strong imagination, he failed. "Merry Christmas, Uncle! God bless you!" cried a cheerful voice. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who came upon him so quickly that this was the first imitation he had of his approach. "Bah!" said Scrooge. "Humbug!" He had so heated himself with a rapid walking in the fog and frost, this nephew of Scrooge's, that he was all in a glow. His face was ruddy and handsome. His eyes sparkled, in his breath smoked again. "Christmas a humbug, Uncle," said Scrooge's nephew. "You don't mean that, I am sure." "I do," said Scrooge. "Merry Christmas! What right have you to be merry?" "What reason have you to be wary? You're poor enough." "Come then," returned the nephew gaily. What right have you to be dismal? What reason have you to be morose? You are rich enough." Scrooge, having no better answer ready on the spur of a moment, said "Bah!" again, and followed it up with "Humbug!" "Don't be cross, Uncle," said the nephew. "What else can I be?" returned the uncle. "When I lived in a situation of fools as this, Merry Christmas, as upon Merry Christmas, what's Christmas time to you? but the time for paying bills without the money, a time for finding yourself a year older and not an hour richer, a time of balancing your books and having every item in M3 round dozens of months presented dead against you. If I could work my will, said Scrooge indulgently, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holy through his heart. He shouted. Uncle, pleaded a nephew. Nephew, returned the uncle sternly, keep Christmas in your own way, and let me keep it in mine. Keep it, repeated Scrooge's nephew, but you don't keep it. Let me leave it alone, then, said Scrooge. Much good may do you. Much good it has ever done you. They are many things from which I might have derived good, but by which I have not profited, I dare say, returned the nephew. Christmas a month of rest, but I am sure I have always thought of Christmas time, when it has came round, apart from veneration due to its sacred name and origin, if everything belonging to it can be apart from that, as a good time, as a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time. The only time I know of in a long calendar of a year, when men and women seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely, and to think of people blew them as they really were, fellow passengers to the grave, and no other race of creatures, born for other journeys, and therefore Uncle thought it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket. I believe that it has done me good, and will do me good, and I say, God bless it. The clerk in the tank involuntarily applauded, becoming immediately sensible of propriety. He poked the fire and distinguished a last thrill spark forever. Let me hit another sound from you, said Scrooge. I will keep your Christmas by losing your situation. You are quite powerful speaker, sir, he added, turning to his nephew. I wonder you don't go into Parliament. Don't be angry, uncle. Come, dine with us tomorrow. Scrooge said that he would see him. Yes, indeed, he did. He went a whole lengthy expression, and he said that he would see him in that extremely fast. But why? Cried Scrooge's nephew. Why? Why did you get married? Said Scrooge. Because I fell in love. Because you fell in love? Grudged Scrooge. As if that were only one thing in the world. What ridiculous then! A Merry Christmas. Good afternoon. Nah, uncle. But you never came to see me before that happened. Why give it as a reason for not coming now? Good afternoon, said Scrooge. I want nothing from you. I ask nothing of you. Why cannot be friends? Good afternoon, said Scrooge. I am sorry with all my heart to find you so resolute. We have never had a quarrel to which I have been a party, but I have made a trial and homage to Christmas. I will keep my Christmas humour to the last. So, a Merry Christmas, Uncle. Good afternoon, said Scrooge, and Happy New Year. And good afternoon, said Scrooge. He's never left the room without any angry word, notwithstanding. he stopped at the outer door to bestow a greetings of the season on the clerk, who, cold as he was one friend Scrooge, for he returned them cordially. "There's another fellow," muttered Scrooge. "Who overheard him? My clerk was 15 shillings a week. A wife and a family. Talking about Merry Christmas, I will retire to Bedlam. This is lunatic in letting Scrooge out, Matthews out. I had let 2 other people in. They were portly gentlemen, pleasant to behold, and now stood with their hats off in Scrooge's office. They had books and papers in their hands, and bowed to him. Scrooge and Marley's, I believe," said one of the gentlemen, referring to his list. "Have I pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley?" "Mr. Marley has been dead these 7 years," Scrooge replied. "He died 7 years ago, this very night. We have no doubt this laboratory is well represented by his surviving partner," said the gentleman, presenting his credential. "It said he was. For there had been 2 kindred spirits." At the enormous word liberty, Scrooge frowned and shook his head, and handed credentials back. "At this season of the year, Mr. Scrooge," said the gentleman, taking up a pen, "it is more than usual desirable that we should make some slight provision for the poor and destitute who suffer greatly. At the present time, many thousands are in the wanted of common necessaries. Hundreds of thousands are in want of common comfort, sir." "There are no prisons," said Scrooge. "Plenty of prisons," said the gentleman, laying down the pen again. "And the Union workhouses," demanded Scrooge. "Are they still in operation?" "They are still," returned the gentleman. "I wish I could say they were not. The trade mail and the poor law are in full vigor then," said Scrooge, "but very busy. Oh, I was afraid, from what you said at first, that something had occurred to stop them in their useful course," said Scrooge. I'm very glad to hear it. Under the impression that scarcely furnished Christian cheer of mind or body to multitude," returned the gentleman. "A few of us were deferring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink, a means of warmth. We choose this time because it is a time, of all others, when want is keenly felt, and abundance rejoices. What shall I pour you down for?" "Nothing," Scrooge replied. "You will wish to be enormous." "I'll wish to be left alone," said Scrooge. "Since you ask me what I wish, gentlemen, this is my answer. I don't make Merry Christmas myself at Christmas, and I can afford to make a deal people merry. I help to support the establishment I have mentioned. They cost enough, and those are badly off and must go there. Many can't go there, and many would ever die. If they would rather die," said Scrooge, "they had better do it, and decrease the surprise populations. Besides, excuse me, I do know that but you might know it," observed the gentleman. "It's not my business," Scrooge returned. It's enough for a man to understand his own business, and not to interfere with other people's. Mine occupies me constantly. Good afternoon, gentlemen." Seeing clearly that it would be useless to pursue their point, the gentleman withdrew. Scrooge resumed his blubbers with an improved opinion of himself, and in a more affectionate temper there was usual with him. Meanwhile, a fog and darkness thickened so that people ran about with flaring links, proffering their services to go before horses in the carriage and conduct them on their way. The ancient tower of a church, whose gruff old bell was always peeping slowly down at Scrooge out of a Gothic window in the wall, became invincible and struck the hours and quarters in the clouds, with tremulous vibrations afterwards, as if its teeth were chattering in its frozen head up there. The cold became intense in the main street and the carnival court. Some labourers were repairing the gas pipes and had lighted a great fire in a brazier, and round which a party of ragged men and boys were gathered, warming their hands and winking their eyes, before the blast in rapture. The water plug being left in such solitude, its flowing slowly congealed and turned to microscopic ice. The brightness of the shops, where honey sprigs and berries crackled in the lamp heat of windows, made pale faces ruddy as they passed. Proctorers and grocers' trade became a splendid joke, a glorious pageant which it was next to impossible to believe that such a dull principles as bargain and a say had everything to do. For Lord Mayor, in a stronghold of the mighty mansion house, gave orders to the 50 cooks and butlers to keep Christmas as the Lord Mayor's household should, and even the little toiler, who had fined 5 shillings on the previous Monday for being drunk of a bloodthirsty in the streets, stirred up towards pudding in his garret, while his lean wife and the baby so out by the beef, foggier yet and colder, piercing, searching, biting cold, if the good Saint Dunstan had but nibbled an evil spirit's nose with a touch of such weather as that, instead of using a familiar weapons, they indeed would have war to Leicester pubs. The owner of skunt young nose, glowed and mumbled by hungry cold as bones are glowed by dogs, scooped down at the Scrooge's keyhole to regale him with a Christmas carol, but at the first sound of God bless you, merry good man, may nothing you dismay, Scrooge seized a ruler with such an energy of action that the sinner fled in terror, leaving the keyhole into the fog and even more congenial frost. At the 11th hour of shunting and counting, house arrived. With an ill-will, Scrooge dismounted from his stool and tacitly admitted for factory expectant clock in a tank, who instantly sniffled his candle out and put his hat. "Will you want it all day tomorrow, I suppose?" said Scrooge. "If quite convenient, sir." "It's not convenient," said Scrooge. "It's not fair. If I was to stop half-a-crown for it." "You did think yourself ill-used, I'll be bound." The clerk smiled faintly. "And yet," said Scrooge, "you don't think me ill-used. When I paid a day's wages for no work." A clerk observed that was only once a year, a poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December, said Scrooge, buttoning his greatcoat to his chin. "But I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here or the early next morning." The clerk promised that he would, and Scrooge walked out with a growl. The office was closed in a twinkling, and the clerk, with the long ends of his white comforter dangling below his waist, for he boasted no great ghost, went down in the slide of the cornhole at the end of a lane of boys 20 times in honour of its being Christmas Eve, then ran home to Kemlin Town as hard as he could pelt to play at the blind man's buff. Scrooge took his marginally dinner in his unusual melancholy tavern, and having read of the newspaper and beguiled rest of the evening with his banker's book. Went home to bed. He lived in the chambers which had once belonged to his deceased partner. They were a gloomy suite of rooms in a lowering pile of building up a yard, where he had so little business to be, that one could scarcely help fancying it have run there when it was a young house playing at hide and seek with the other house, and had forgotten a way out again. He was old enough now, cheerily enough, for nobody left in it but Scrooge, the other ones being or let out as offices. The yard was so dark that even Scrooge, who knew his every stone, was fain to grope with his hands. A fog and frost so hung about the dark old gateway of a house that it seemed as the genius of the weather sat in a mindful meditation of a threshold. Now, it is a fact that there was nothing at all particular about the knocker on the door, except that was very large. It is also the fact that Scrooge had seen it night and morning during his all-day residence in that place. Also, Scrooge had as little of what is called fancy about him as any man in the city of London, even including, which is a bold word, the corporation, alderman, and livery. Let it also be borne in mind that Scrooge had not bestowed one thought on Marley since his last mention of his 7 years dead partner that afternoon, and for let any man explain to me, if can, how it happened that Scrooge, having his keyhole key in the lock of the door, saw in the locker without its undergoing any intimate of process of change. Not a locker, but Marley's face. Marley's face was not in the impenetrable shadow, as the other objects in the yard were, but had a dismal light about, like a bad lobster in a dark cellar. It was not angry or furious, but looked at Scrooge as Marley, who used to look with ghostly spectacles turned up his ghostly forehead. The hair was curiously stirred, as if by breath of hot air, and through her eyes were wide open. They were perfectly motionless. That and his livid colour made it horrible, but his horror seemed to be, in spite of a face beyond his control, rather than a part of his own expression. As Scrooge looked fixedly at this phenomenon, it was the knocker again, to say that he was not startled, or that his blood was not conscious of a terrible sensation to which he had been a stranger from fancy, would be untrue, but put his hand upon the key he had requisitioned, turned it sturdily, walked in, and lighted up a candle. He did pause with a mentioned oscillation before he shut the door, and he did look consciously behind it first, as he half expected to be terrified with the sight of Jake Marley's pigtails sticking out into the hall. But there was nothing on the back of the door. Expected the screws and nuts that held the knocker on. So he said, "Pull, pull." Closed it with a bang. The sound resounded through the house like a thunder. Everyone above and every scut in the wine merchant's cellar below appeared to have separate peal of echoes of his own. Scrooge, not a man to be frightened by echoes, he fastened the door and walked across the hall and upstairs slowly too, trimming his candle as he went. You will talk vulgarly about driving a coal and 6 upper gold, good old flight of stairs, or throw a bad young actor of Parliament, but mean to say, you might have good hers up that staircase. Take it up broadwise, with a splendid bar towards the wall and a door towards the balustrades, and done it easy. There was a plenty of width or for that, the room to spare, which is a reason why Scrooge thought he saw locomotive hearse going on before him in the gloom. Half a dozen gas lamps out of a straight wooden half lightened the entry too well, so you may suppose that it was a pretty dark with Scrooge step. Up Scrooge went, not caring the button for that. Darkness is cheap, and Scrooge liked it, but before he shut his heavy door, he walked through his rooms to see that all was right. He had just enough recollections of a face to decide to do at that. Sitting room, bedroom, flumberman, or has under the sofa, as they should be. Nobody under the table, nobody under the sofa. A small fire in the grate, spoon and basin ready, and a little saucepan of grill. Scrooge had a cold on his head. Upon the hob, no under the bed, nobody in the closet, nobody in his dressing room, which was hanging up in a suspicious attitude against the wall. Lumber room as usual. Old fire guard. Old shoes, 2 fish baskets, washing stand on the 3 legs, and a poker. Quite satisfied, he closed his door and locked himself in, double locked himself in, which was not his custom. First secured against surprise, took off his cravat and put on his dressing gown and slippers, and his light cap, and sat down before the fire to take his grill. It was a very low fire indeed. Nothing on such a bitter night. He was upglided too close to it, abroad over it before he could extract the least sensation of warmth from such a handful of fuel. A fireplace was an old one built by some Dutch merchant long ago, and puffled all round with quaint Dutch tiles designed to illustrate sculptures. They were Cain's and Abel's Pharaoh's daughters, Queens of Sheba and angelic messengers descended through the air on clouds like feathered beds. Abraham's Belshazzar's apostles put off to sea in a butter boats, thousands of figures to attract his thoughts. And yet this face of Marley, 7 years dead, come like an ancient prophet's word, and swallowed up a whole, if each smooth tile had been a plank at first, without a shape, some picture of a surface from disjoint fragments of his thoughts. There would have been a copy of Marley's head on every one. Humbug, said Scrooge, and walked across the room. After 7 turns, he sat down again as he threw his head back in the chair. His glance happened to rest upon the bell, a disused bell that hung in the wall and communicated for some purpose now forgotten with a chamber of the highest story of the building. It was with great astonishment, and with a Scrooge strange, inexpressible dread, that his hand looked. He saw his bell again to swing. It swung softly. In the outset that it scarcely made a sound, but soon it rang out loudly, and so did every bell in the house. This might have lasted half a minute, or a minute, but it seemed an hour. The bells ceased as they had begun together. They will succeed. But clouding noise deep down below, as if some person were dangling a heavy chain over the basks in the wine merchant's cellar. Scrooge then remembered to have heard that ghosts in a haunted house were described as dangling chains. Then the cellar door flew open with a booming sound, and then heard a noise much louder on the floors below, then coming up the stairs, then coming straight towards this door. So it's humbug still, said Scrooge. I won't believe it. His colour changed though, when, without a pause, it came on through the heavy door, past it into the room before his eyes. Upon its coming in, a dying flame leaped up as though it cried, I know him, Marley's ghost, and fell again. The same face, a very same. Marley in his pigtail, usual waistcoat, tights and boots, and tassels on his latter bristling like his ponytail, and his coat skirts, and the hair upon his head. The chain he drew was clasped about his middle. It was long and wound about like a tail, and it was made, for Scrooge observed closely, of cash-box, keys, padlocks, ledgers and deeds, and heavy purse, what in steel. His body was transparent, so that Scrooge, observing him, and looking through his waistcoat, could see two buttons on his coat behind. Scrooge had often heard it said that Marley had no bowels, but he had never believed it until now. No, nor did he believe it even now, though he looked a fountain through and through, and saw it standing him before him, though he felt the chilling influence of his death-cold eyes, and marked every texture of the folded kerchief, but bound hold about his head and chin, which wrapper he had not observed before. He was still incredulous, and fought against his sense. How not? How now? Said Scrooge, caustic and cold as ever. What do you want with me? Much. Molly's voice. No doubt about it. Who are you? Ask me how I was. You were then, said Scrooge, raising his voice. You are particular for the fade. I was going to say, to the shade, but substituted this. As more appropriate. In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley. Can you sit down? Asked Scrooge, looking doubtfully at him. I can. Do it then. Scrooge asked questions because he didn't know whether the ghost so transparent might find himself in a condition to take a chair, and he felt that in the evening of its being impossible, it might involve necessity of an embarrassing explanation, but a ghost sat down on the opposite side of the fireplace, as if were quite used to it. You don't believe in me? Observed the ghost. I don't, said Scrooge. What evidence would you have of my reality beyond that of your sense? I don't know, said Scrooge. Why do you doubt your sense? Because, said Scrooge, a little thing affects them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheats. You may be a digestive bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, and a fragment of an underdone potato. There's more of grave than of grave about you, whatever you are. Scrooge was not much in the habit of cracking jokes, nor did he feel in his heart, but any means waggeth them. The truth is that he tried to be smart as means of distractions of his own attention, and keeping down his horror for a spectre's voice disturbed the very marrow in his bones. To sit staring at those fixed and glassed eyes in silence for the moment. Would play? Scrooge felt very serious with him. There was something very awful too, in the spectres being provided with an infernal atmosphere of his own. Scrooge could not feel it himself. But this was clearly the case, for the ghost sat perfectly motionless. His hair, skirts, and tassels were still agitated as by the hot viper from the oven. "You see this toothpick," said Scrooge, returning quickly to the charge. For the reason just assigned, and wishing though it were only for a second to the first affection slowly gazed from himself. "I do," replied the ghost. "You are not looking at it," said Scrooge. "But I see it," said the ghost. "Notwithstanding." "Well," returned Scrooge, I have but to swallow this, and but for the rest of my days, persecuted by a legion of goblins, all of my own creation. Humbug, I tell you, humbug!" At this, the spirit raised a frightful cry and shook his chin with such a dismal and appalling noise that Scrooge had on tight to his chair to save himself from falling in the swan. But how much greater was his horror when the phantom, taking off a bandage round his head, it were too warm to wear indoors. Its lower jaw dropped down upon his breast. Scrooge fell upon his knees and clasped his hands before his face. "Mercy," he said, "dreadful apparition! Why did you trouble me?" "Man of a worldly mind," replied the ghost. "Do you believe in me or not?" "I do," said Scrooge. "I must, but why do spirits walk the earth? And why do they come to me?" "It is required of every man," the ghost returned, "that the spirit within him should walk abroad among his fellow men, and travel air and wide. And if that spirit goes not forth through life, it is condemned to do so after death. It is doomed to wander through the world. Oh, woe is me! And witness what it could not share, but it might have shared on earth, and turn to happiness." Again the spectre raised a cry, and shook his chin, and wrung his shadowy hands. "You are flattered," said Scrooge, trembling. "Why tell me?" "Tell me why?" "I wear the chain I forged in life," replied a ghost. "I made it link by link, and yard by yard, and gravelled on it of my own free will, and of my own free will I wore it. Is its pattern strange to you?" Scrooge trembled more and more. "Or would you know," pursued the ghost, "the weight and length of the strong coil you bear yourself? It was a full as heavy as long as this 7 Christmas Eves ago. You have laboured on it since. It is a ponderous chain." Scrooge glanced about him on the floor, as an inspection of found himself surrounded by some 50 or 60 fathoms of iron cable, but he could see nothing. "Jacob," he said imploringly. "Oh, Jacob, Marley, tell me more." Speak comfort to me, Jacob. I have none to give, the ghost replied. It came from other regions, Ebenezer Scrooge, and it's confided by other ministers to other kinds of men. Nor can I tell you what I would. For every little more is all permitted to me. I cannot rest. I cannot stay. I cannot remember anywhere. My spirit never worked beyond our counter house. Mark me, in life my spirit never travelled beyond the narrow limits of our money-changing hole, and weary journeys lie before me. It was a habit with me, whether he became thoughtful to put his head in his breeches pockets, pondering on what the ghost had said. He did so now, but not without lifting his head, his eyes or getting off his knees. You must have been very slow about it, Jacob, Scrooge observed, in a business-like manner, though with humanity, a defence was slow. A ghost repeated, 7 days dead, Mrs. Scrooge, and travelling all time. The whole time, said the ghost. No one, no rest, no peace. In a senseless torture of remorse. You travel fast, said Scrooge. On the wings of the wind, replied the ghost. You might have to go over a great quantity of ground in 7 years, said Scrooge. A ghost, on hearing this, set up another cry, and clamped his chains so hideously in the dead silence of the night that the wind would have been justified in indicating it for nonsense. Oh, captive, bond, and double-ironed, cried the fountain, not to know. For ages of incessant labour by the mortal creatures, for this earth must pass into the eternity before the good of which it has suspectable is or develop, not to know that any Christian spirit working kindly in this little sphere, whatever may be, will find his mortal life too short for his best means of usefulness, not so nigh, that no space of regret can make amends for no life's opportunity misused. Yet such was I. Oh, such was I. But you were always a good man of business, Jacob, faltered Scrooge. Oh, who now began to apply to himself business? Cried the ghost, wrangling his hands again. Mankind was my business. The welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and forbearance were all my business. The dealings of my trade, but a drop of water in comprehensive ocean of my business. It held its chain at an arm's length, as if had that word cause of all its unraveling grief, and flung it heavily upon the ground again. At this time of 1 year, a spectre said, "Our southernmost. Why did I walk through crowds of fellow beings, if my eyes turned down, never raised them to be that blessed? Stars which lead the wise men to the poor are bed. Were there no poor homes to which its light would have conduct me? Scrooge was very much dismayed to hear the spectre going on at his rate, and began to quake succeedingly. "Hear me," cried the ghost. "My time is nearly gone, I will," said Scrooge, "but don't be hard upon me. Don't be flowery, Jacob, pray." How is that? I appear before you in a shape that you can see. I may not have sat invincible beside you, and many a day. It was not an agreeable idea. Scrooge shivered, and wiped a perspiration from his brow. "That is no light. A part of my panaces," pursued a ghost. "I am here tonight to warn you that I have yet a chance and hope of escaping my fate, a chance and hope of my procuring Ebenezer." Okay, so I'm stopping on page 27, but okay, so I see you guys in the next video. I will continue on next chapters. Next one's going to be first of the three spirits, and the second of three spirits, and then after the three spirits, three entities. Okay, guys. I'm glad you subscribe. If you have already subscribed to my channel, you can always hit the bell notifications. And okay, so I hope you will continue reading the Christmas Carol. I hope you guys have a good day, and I'll see you soon. I will continue reading more about Christmas Carol. I'll see you later, guys.